In the endless darkness of space, a faint signal began its lonely journey. It was weak, broken, and filled with fear. The message came from a small planet called Illyria, home to a gentle and intelligent species known as the Illyrians. They were peaceful beings who had spent centuries studying art, harmony, and the beauty of the stars. For them, war was something ancient and forgotten, a story told in old texts but never truly experienced. They believed that the universe was kind, that other civilizations would share their dreams of peace, but they were wrong. One night their skies burned. The Krath Dominion, a cruel and powerful alien empire, arrived without warning. They came with ships that blotted out the sun and weapons that tore through cities like paper. The Illyrians had no defense, no armies, and no weapons strong enough to resist. They watched their world fall apart, their families taken as slaves, their culture reduced to ash. Their leader, High Chancellor Lyra, ordered the creation of a distress signal, a message begging for help from anyone, anywhere in the galaxy. It was their last hope. The Illyrians built the beacon in the ruins of their capital. Engineers and scientists worked day and night, their hands trembling but determined. They recorded their plea in a dozen galactic languages, describing their suffering and asking for mercy. "Please," the message said, "we are dying. We seek aid from any who can hear. We offer friendship, alliance, and gratitude. Save us from the Karath." When the beacon finally activated, a wave of energy shot into space carrying their desperate call for help. The Illyrians prayed that somewhere a kind and advanced species would hear their cry. Days passed, then weeks, then months. No answer came. The Illyrians began to lose hope. They believed their message had been lost among the stars or ignored by those too afraid to face the Karath. Some said that maybe no one cared. Others whispered that perhaps the galaxy was just as cruel as their enemies. But what they didn't know was that their message had not disappeared. It had simply traveled farther than they ever imagined. Millions of light years away, the signal drifted across the Milky Way until it reached a small blue planet in a quiet solar system. The planet was called Earth, and its inhabitants were called humans. Unlike the Illyrians, humans were not peaceful creatures. They were survivors born from chaos. Their history was full of wars, disasters, and endless struggles. They had learned to fight the cold, the hunger, and even each other. The universe, if it had known of them, would have called them dangerous. To others, they were death-worlders, creatures evolved to survive a planet that tried to kill them every day. The message was first detected by a research station in Alaska. The scientists there almost ignored it, thinking it was static or a malfunction. But when they cleaned up the signal, they heard the trembling voice of an Illyrian scientist begging for help. The recording was clear, emotional, and haunting. "To any who hear us," the alien voice said, "our world is dying. We are a peaceful people. Please, help us." The scientists froze. For centuries, humanity had dreamed of finding life beyond Earth, but no one expected the first contact to be a cry for help. The news spread quickly through secret government channels. Top officials debated whether to respond. Some argued that it was too dangerous. "If there's one message," said a general, "there could be a trap waiting for us." Others believed it could be a historic opportunity. But while politicians argued, one person made a decision. Captain Mara Collins, a former soldier-turned-explorer, had spent her life chasing the unknown. She was stubborn, brave, and had seen more death than she cared to remember. When she heard the alien message, something in her heart shifted. She couldn't ignore it. Mara gathered a small crew of volunteers, scientists, engineers, and ex-military personnel. They were not the kind of team one expected for a peaceful mission, but they were ready for anything. They modified her ship, the Valkyrie, for deep space travel, adding experimental drives and AI-assisted systems. Officially, they were told to observe and report. Unofficially, Mara had another plan. "If they're really in trouble," she told her crew, "we're not just going to watch." As the Valkyrie prepared for launch, the media knew nothing. The mission was kept secret from the world to avoid panic. Only a few high-ranking officials were aware, and even they doubted the mission would succeed. But Mara believed. As the engines roared and the stars stretched into lines, the Valkyrie disappeared into the void, following the coordinates hidden within the Illyrian signal. Meanwhile, on Illyria, the situation grew worse. The Karath Dominion had tightened their grip. Entire continents were enslaved. Children were taken to serve in mines and ancient temples were burned. The Illyrians who remained free hid in the mountains, surviving on little food and fading hope. High Chancellor Lyra, once a symbol of peace, now lived in a cave watching her people fade away. Every night she looked at the dark sky and whispered, "Did anyone hear us?" Light years away, the Valkyrie raced through deep space. The journey was long and dangerous. The crew faced system failures, radiation storms, and long months of silence. Some wondered if the signal had been a mistake. "What if it's just an echo?" one of them asked. Mara shook her head. "Even if it is, we go. Because if it's real, they need us." Her determination spread through the ship like fire. They began to call themselves the Answerers, believing that their mission had meaning, even if no one else believed it. After what felt like eternity, the Valkyrie emerged from hyperspace near a dying star. Before them hung Illyria, a world covered in smoke and fire. The sensors showed cities destroyed, oceans poisoned, and ships orbiting like vultures. The crew fell silent. This was not the peaceful paradise they expected. It was a battlefield. "God," whispered one of them. "What happened here?" Back on the surface, the Illyrians saw a strange light streaking across the sky. Some thought it was another Karath attack, but it wasn't. It was the Valkyrie descending through the clouds. The humans had arrived. What none of them realized at that moment was that the universe had made a mistake, or perhaps a miracle. The Illyrians had sent their call to anyone who would listen. They wanted compassion, wisdom, peace. Instead, the message had reached humanity, the most unpredictable, emotional, and dangerous species in the galaxy. The Illyrians didn't know it yet, but they hadn't called for saviors. They had called for Deathworlders, and Deathworlders never ignored a cry for help. That night, under a broken sky filled with fire and smoke, two worlds were about to meet. One born in peace, the other in chaos. One desperate for mercy, the other armed with defiance. The signal that crossed the stars was meant to bring salvation. It would, but not in the way the Illyrians imagined. For when humans answer a distress call, they don't come to negotiate. They come to end the threat, no matter the cost. And so began the story of how an alien SOS reached the wrong species, and how that mistake would change the fate of two civilizations forever. The Valkyrie drifted through the black sea of stars, its engines humming softly. Inside, the humans prepared for what they might find on Illyria. Captain Mara Collins stood near the main window, staring at the red and blue clouds of the nebula that surrounded the dying star. The crew behind her moved quickly, checking sensors, charging weapons, and running life support systems. They didn't know what they were walking into, but every one of them could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just another mission. It was the first step into a new chapter of human history, one that could end with either discovery or disaster. When the Valkyrie finally broke through the Illyrian atmosphere, the crew fell silent. The planet below looked like a wounded animal. Dark scars of destruction covered its surface. Fires burned across continents, sending pillars of smoke into the clouds. Huge alien ships floated in orbit, shaped like blades and black as night. The scanners confirmed what they feared. The planet's population had been reduced by more than half. Millions were dead or missing. The crew looked at each other in disbelief. "They weren't exaggerating," said one of the engineers quietly. "This place really is dying." Mara clenched her jaw. "Then let's make sure someone survives," she said. They found a landing zone in the mountains away from the main battle zones. The air was thin and heavy with ash. As the Valkyrie touched down, the humans felt the weight of what they were about to do. They wore armor designed for hostile environments, helmets with translators, and carried both medical gear and weapons. They didn't know who would greet them, or if anyone would greet them at all. When the ramp lowered, they stepped out carefully, the wind whipping through their suits. The world was eerily quiet except for the distant rumble of explosions. Then movement. From the shadows of broken rocks, small figures appeared. Illyrians. They were thin, pale, and trembling. Their large eyes glowed faintly, filled with fear and exhaustion. When they saw the humans, they froze. These beings were unlike anything they had imagined. The humans were taller, rough-looking, and covered in armor that made them seem more like machines than living things. The Illyrians expected angels or scholars. Instead, they got warriors. One Illyrian, clearly braver than the rest, stepped forward. He wore torn robes and carried a small glowing device, the symbol of their council. His voice shook as he spoke through the translator. "Who are you?" The translator crackled before the answer came. "We're from Earth," Mara said. "We heard your call." The Illyrians looked at each other in disbelief. Earth was a name they had never heard. They had expected help from the Galactic Union, not strangers from an unknown system. You came to help? The Illyrian asked cautiously. That's the idea, Mara replied. But first, tell us what happened here. As they spoke, more Illyrians gathered around. Some cried when they realized the message had been answered. Others hid, too frightened by the humans' presence. The Illyrians led Mara and her team to a hidden underground shelter, where survivors had taken refuge. The tunnels were cold and lit by faint blue crystals. Hundreds of Illyrians huddled together, weak and starving. Children clung to their parents. The air was filled with quiet sobs and the smell of smoke. Mara felt a sharp ache in her chest. We're too late, she whispered. Not yet, said one of her crew. They're still alive. The humans began to work immediately. The medics distributed rations, purified water, and treated the wounded. The engineers repaired broken machines, restoring power to parts of the shelter. The Illyrians watched in wonder. Humans moved with speed and purpose, their hands steady, their faces hard but kind. They didn't flinch at the sight of blood or death. It was as if they had seen it all before. And in truth, they had. When night fell, Mara met with High Chancellor Lyra, the leader of the Illyrians. Lyra's once bright eyes were dim, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. We did not think anyone would come, she said softly. Our people have been slaughtered. The Karath control the skies. They take what they want and burn what remains. We have no weapons left. Mara listened carefully, her mind racing. You said the Karath came without warning? Lyra nodded. They said we were weak, unworthy of our world. They wanted our resources and our people for their empire. We tried to reason with them, but they do not listen to words. Mara stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, we can't fight them head-on, not yet. But we can help you fight back. Humans don't run from bullies. Lyra looked confused. Fight back with what? You have only one ship. Mara smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what one ship can do. Over the next few days, the humans began studying the enemy. They used drones to map Karath patrols, hacked into their communications, and learned how their technology worked. The more they discovered, the more they realized how dangerous the Karath truly were. Their ships were massive and armed with weapons that could vaporize a city. But they also had weaknesses, predictable patterns, blind spots, and arrogance. The Karath believed the Illyrians were too weak to resist. They had no idea that humans were now on the ground. Meanwhile, the Illyrians struggled to understand their new allies. Humans were strange to them. They laughed even when they were scared, argued loudly, and seemed to enjoy danger. They called themselves problem solvers, but the Illyrians saw them as something else, creatures of fire. One Illyrian doctor asked a human medic why they risked their lives for strangers. The medic simply replied, because someone has to. The Illyrian didn't understand at first. Later he realized it wasn't logic that drove the humans. It was something deeper, something fierce. One night, a Karath scouting drone spotted heat signatures near the mountains. A patrol ship descended, scanning the area. The Illyrians panicked, but the humans stayed calm. We can't let them find this base, Mara said. She and two soldiers went outside, hiding behind rocks as the drone passed overhead. They waited for the perfect moment, then fired a pulse weapon that overloaded the drone's circuits, sending it crashing to the ground. The explosion echoed across the valley. For the first time in weeks, the Illyrians cheered. They had witnessed resistance. But the victory came with a price. The Karath would now know someone was fighting back. The next day, the skies filled with enemy ships. The humans watched from the mountains as fire rained down on the plains below. Mara turned to her crew. They'll come for us next, she said. So we hit first. Her eyes burned with determination. If they want a war, they'll get one. The Illyrians were terrified. You can't fight them, Lyra said. They'll destroy you. Mara simply looked at her. Maybe, but we've faced worse. The humans began building traps, hacking enemy systems, and training the Illyrians to use basic weapons. The peaceful people who once refused to fight now found themselves learning from soldiers who had spent their lives surviving the impossible. Slowly, the Illyrians began to change. They were still afraid, but they were no longer helpless. Days turned into weeks. The humans and Illyrians worked together, forming an unlikely alliance. The shelter became a base, the survivors became fighters, and the fear that once filled the air turned into hope. The Illyrians started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could win. For the first time, the word defeat didn't feel final. The humans' courage was contagious. The Karath, however, were not blind. They noticed the growing resistance. Their leader, Commander Threx, ordered a full-scale sweep of the northern regions, determined to crush any rebellion. But he didn't know that the Deathworlders were waiting for him. As the humans prepared for the coming battle, Mara looked at the stars and thought of Earth. "We were never supposed to be here," she said quietly. "They called us monsters once. Maybe we are. But we're the monsters on the right side this time." Her second-in-command smiled grimly. "Let's show them what happens when you ask a Deathworld for help." And so the wrong species had answered the call. The Illyrians had wanted saviors, diplomats, maybe even saints. Instead, they got humans, rough, reckless, and full of fire. But as the first light of dawn broke over the ruined horizon, one thing became clear. Sometimes the universe doesn't send gentle hands to save you. Sometimes it sends warriors. And for the Illyrians, that was exactly what they needed. The first meeting between the humans and the Illyrians changed everything. At first, the Illyrians did not know whether to be grateful or afraid. The humans were loud, rough, and full of strange energy. They argued, laughed, and worked nonstop. To the Illyrians, they seemed unpredictable, like wild storms walking in human form. But slowly, they began to realize something important. These strange beings were not here to rule or control them. They were here to fight, to protect, and to teach. Captain Mara Collins became a symbol of hope among the Illyrians. She moved through their ruined camps with purpose, helping organize survivors and rebuilding communication systems. Her voice was calm but firm. "We're not here to save you," she often said. "We're here to show you how to save yourselves." The Illyrians listened carefully, their fear slowly replaced by curiosity. They had never met a species that carried such strength in their hearts. The humans began training small groups of Illyrians. They taught them how to hide from enemy sensors, how to set traps, and how to move quietly through the forests. The Illyrians were hesitant at first. Holding a weapon felt wrong to them. For generations they had believed in peace and reason. But when they saw the Karath soldiers burning villages and taking their children, something inside them changed. They realized that peace was only possible if someone was willing to fight for it. The humans didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with ideas. One of the engineers, a man named Liam Torres, helped the Illyrians rebuild their old technology. He showed them how to turn their mining tools into energy weapons, and their farming drones into flying scouts. "You don't need fancy guns," he said with a grin. "You just need a reason to fight, and a bit of human stubbornness." The Illyrians laughed at his words, but they never forgot them. In just a few weeks, the first organized resistance began. The humans led small missions to sabotage the Karath supply lines. They attacked fuel depots, disabled communication towers, and rescued captured civilians. The Illyrians watched in amazement as the humans worked. They were fearless, almost reckless. They didn't hide from danger, they ran toward it. When one mission went wrong and a human soldier was injured, he laughed through the pain. "It's just a scratch," he said, even though his arm was bleeding. The Illyrians couldn't understand how anyone could joke in such a moment. But that was human nature. They turned even fear into courage. One evening, the Illyrians saw what it truly meant to be a Deathworlder. The Karath had found one of the human outposts in the mountains. A full squadron of enemy ships descended from the sky, ready to destroy everything. Instead of retreating, Mara ordered her team to stand their ground. The humans set up a trap using old communication towers and electric mines. When the Karath ships arrived, the humans activated the towers, releasing a massive energy pulse that fried the enemy's systems. The ships crashed one by one, lighting up the night sky. The Illyrians watched from a distance, their hearts pounding. It was the first real victory they had seen in months. After the battle, the Illyrians rushed to help. They expected to find chaos and fear, but the humans were laughing, sitting among the smoking wreckage. One of them was roasting a piece of alien fruit over a fire. "Dinner time," he joked. The Illyrians stared, unsure whether to cry or laugh. For the first time, they felt something powerful spreading through their people. Hope. As days turned into weeks, the humans continued to train and fight. But more importantly, they began to understand the Illyrians on a deeper level. The Illyrians were not weak. They were simply unused to violence. Their strength was in unity and compassion. They cared for one another, even in the darkest times. Mara saw this and admired it. "You have something we lost long ago," she told Lyra one night as they watched the stars. "You still believe people can be good?" Lyra smiled sadly. "And you have what we never had, the courage to fight for it." The bond between the two species grew stronger. Humans taught the Illyrians survival. The Illyrians taught the humans patience and empathy. Together they became something new, a partnership between heart and fire. The once frightened Illyrians began calling the humans the Iron Spirits. It was a name of respect, born from awe. One day, the Karath launched a massive ground assault near the southern plains. Thousands of enemy troops marched forward, destroying everything in their path. The Illyrians were terrified, believing it was the end. But the humans had a plan. They led the Illyrians into a canyon filled with rock tunnels. There they set up hidden explosives and traps. When the Karath entered the canyon, thinking they had cornered the resistance, Mara gave the signal. A chain of explosions echoed through the valley. The canyon walls collapsed, burying half the enemy forces. It was a brutal victory. The Illyrians had never seen such destruction before. Many of them wept, not from sadness but from disbelief. They had fought and won. Mara stood among them, covered in dust, her face hard but proud. "You see," she said, "you're not helpless. You're warriors now." But victory came with a heavy price. Some humans didn't return. One of the engineers, Liam, was killed in the explosion after staying behind to trigger the last charge. The Illyrians mourned him deeply. They built a small stone monument where he fell, carving words in both languages. He fought for those who could not fight for themselves. The humans said nothing, but their silence spoke louder than words. After that day, the Illyrians changed forever. They no longer looked at the humans with fear. They saw them as brothers and sisters in arms. They began to rebuild small villages under human guidance, this time with defenses and hidden shelters. Children played again in the streets, though their laughter was quieter than before. The humans were always near, watching, protecting, and ready for whatever came next. One night a storm swept across the planet. The humans and Illyrians gathered in the shelters, sharing stories. A young Illyrian asked Mara why humans fought so hard for a world that wasn't theirs. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because once we were like you, lost, afraid, and alone, and someone helped us. Now it's our turn." The child smiled faintly. "You're not what I imagined when we called for help." Mara laughed. "No one ever expects us. That's the thing about humans, we're full of surprises." The Illyrians began documenting everything the humans did. They recorded their tactics, their teamwork, even their jokes. They wanted to remember the people who came from a distant world to fight for them, and as they learned more about Earth, they were shocked by what they discovered. The humans had survived plagues, wars, and disasters. They had nearly destroyed themselves many times, but every time they rebuilt. It became clear why the universe feared them. Humanity was not the strongest or the smartest species, but they were the most unbreakable. The Karath soon began to realize that something was wrong. Their patrols were being ambushed. Their soldiers were vanishing. The once easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. Their commanders could not understand how a group of weak Illyrians could fight so effectively. They didn't know about the Deathworlders. They didn't know that humanity was now part of the war. In the following weeks, the humans and Illyrians grew bolder. They attacked supply convoys, liberated towns, and spread messages of rebellion. Everywhere the Karath turned, they found resistance. The Illyrians began to sing again, their songs no longer of sorrow but of courage. They painted symbols of fire on walls, the mark of the Deathworlders, so that everyone would know who stood with them. For the first time since the invasion, the Illyrians believed in victory. They no longer waited for heroes from the stars. They had found them already, rough, scarred, imperfect humans who fought like demons but carried hearts full of hope. The galaxy had sent them the wrong species, but perhaps it wasn't a mistake after all. As the resistance grew stronger, the humans prepared for the next step, a full counterattack. Mara knew it would be dangerous, but she also knew it was necessary. "We've shown them what we can do on the ground," she told her team. "Now it's time to show them what happens when humans take the sky." And so, under the cold light of Illyria's moons, the humans and Illyrians stood together, ready for the battles to come. The war was far from over, but something powerful had begun. The Deathworlders had arrived, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The war on Illyria had reached a terrifying peak. The Karath Dominion, furious at the unexpected resistance, deployed its full fleet of warships and orbital bombardment drones. The skies were choked with smoke and fire, and the ground shook under the constant impact of enemy weapons. For the Illyrians, this was the darkest moment in their history. They had already lost so much, their cities, their families, their sense of safety. But the arrival of humans had given them a glimmer of hope. Now that hope was being tested like never before. Captain Mara Collins stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. Her team had spent days preparing for the inevitable strike. The humans moved with precision and urgency, setting traps, reinforcing underground shelters, and teaching the Illyrians how to survive against superior forces. "This is it," she said quietly to her second-in-command, Commander Rhea. "If we fail, none of this matters. But if we succeed, we can turn the tide." Her voice carried determination, but underneath it, there was no illusion of safety. Every plan had risk, every move could cost lives, but they had no choice. Survival demanded action. The Illyrians were terrified. They had watched the humans fight, yes, but this was different. Thousands of enemy ships hung above them, bristling with weapons capable of destroying their world in minutes. The humans began distributing basic weapons and teaching the Illyrians tactical maneuvers. "Stick together," Mara instructed. "Use what we've trained for. Don't panic and trust each other." It was hard for the Illyrians to understand. Fighting was unnatural to them. They were gentle by nature, creatures of thought and art, not war. But the humans' courage was contagious. Slowly they began to move, their fear tempered by guidance and purpose. The first wave of the Karath assault began with orbital bombardments. Cities that had already been damaged were torn apart further. Rivers boiled under heat beams, forests burned, and screaming sirens echoed through the valleys. The Illyrians huddled in underground shelters, praying that the humans' preparations would hold. Mara moved among them, calming panic, checking defenses, and directing operations. "We have to be smarter," she said. "They have numbers, but we have strategy. And humans? We never give up." As the bombardment continued, Mara and her team initiated their counterattack. Using stolen Karath schematics, they had set up energy traps along key paths and had rigged derelict Karath ships with remote-triggered explosives. The humans' approach was bold. They didn't hide or retreat. They used distraction tactics, luring Karath soldiers into ambushes while Illyrians helped set up defensive lines. The first encounters were chaotic. Explosions rocked the ground. Humans dove into battle fearlessly, while Illyrians watched, learning how courage could turn fear into action. One of the turning points came when Mara personally led a team to hijack a Karath warship. They approached under the cover of smoke and used electromagnetic pulses to disable its systems. Once inside, they fought their way through corridors filled with alien soldiers. The Illyrians, observing from a distance, were both horrified and fascinated. They had never imagined such acts of bravery and violence, but the humans moved with discipline and purpose. When the ship's weapons were finally turned against the enemy fleet, debris rained down and several Karath vessels exploded. It was a stunning victory that sent shockwaves through both sides. Meanwhile, the Illyrians began to change in ways Mara had anticipated. They were still gentle, still hesitant to cause harm without reason, but they were learning to resist. Under human instruction, they became part of the strategy, guiding troops, setting traps, and even engaging in small skirmishes. They discovered a courage they hadn't known existed, inspired by the humans who fought not because they had to, but because they refused to let others suffer. The Karath, meanwhile, were baffled. How could a supposedly defenseless people suddenly strike with such coordination and ferocity? As days turned into weeks, the humans' tactics grew bolder. Mara coordinated a massive assault on the Karath supply lines. Human pilots flew into enemy formations, drawing fire while unmanned drones and repurposed Illyrian technology destroyed fuel depots, weapons caches, and command outposts. Every operation cost lives. Some humans were lost and some Illyrians were injured in the chaos. But the result was undeniable. The Karath were being forced into retreat, unable to predict or contain the resistance. The humans' presence had transformed a hopeless fight into a war that could be won. The most critical moment arrived when the Karath launched their planetary annihilation fleet, a group of ships capable of flattening entire cities in minutes. The Illyrians were paralyzed by fear, convinced that this was the end. Mara assessed the situation quickly. "We don't have the firepower to confront them head-on," she told her officers. "But we can outsmart them." Using hacked communication channels and repurposed enemy systems, they coordinated a massive ambush. Karath warships were lured into narrow canyons. Energy mines were detonated remotely, and human pilots performed near-suicidal maneuvers to disable enemy shields. The battles were intense, chaotic, and deadly. Every strike required timing, courage, and complete trust in one another. The Illyrians observed the humans in awe. They had never seen beings so willing to risk everything for others. Soldiers who laughed in the face of death, engineers who ran into collapsing structures to save civilians, medics who treated injuries under fire. They seemed unstoppable. Even those who fell became symbols of courage, inspiring both humans and Illyrians alike. The Illyrians began to understand that fighting was not only about killing enemies, but also about protecting the world they loved. Humanity had shown them the difference. One of the most dramatic moments occurred when Mara personally led a raid on a Karath command ship. The humans boarded the vessel, battling through alien soldiers and chaotic energy fields. Explosions rocked the hull as Mara and her team planted charges to disable the ship. The Illyrians, watching from below, felt a mix of fear and hope. When the ship's engines finally blew, it crashed into the enemy fleet, sending debris and destruction across orbit. It was a risky maneuver that could have cost Mara her life, but it succeeded spectacularly. The Karath began to panic. Their previously organized attacks became disjointed, their soldiers confused by the sudden losses and unexpected tactics. The humans were no longer just fighting, they were leading a revolution. The Illyrians, inspired by this relentless courage, started taking initiative, guiding small groups of survivors to sabotage Karath operations. Every successful mission increased morale. Slowly the tide was turning. Throughout the fighting, Mara never forgot the cost. Humans and Illyrians alike lost friends, family, and comrades. Each casualty weighed heavily on her, but she refused to stop. Every life saved, she reminded her team, is worth every risk we take. Her leadership inspired loyalty, bravery, and determination. Humans fought not because they wanted glory, but because they believed in something greater, saving an entire civilization from annihilation. The Illyrians, learning from this example, began to believe that perhaps survival was not only possible, but inevitable if they remained united. Months passed, and the resistance strengthened. The Illyrians rebuilt some of their cities, fortified them, and learned to defend themselves. They were no longer passive victims. They had become participants in the war. Human ingenuity combined with Illyrian knowledge allowed for creative strategies, using terrain to funnel enemies into traps, hacking Karath drones, and even using psychological tactics to confuse their oppressors. The Karath, for all their strength, were beginning to falter. Finally, after weeks of relentless fighting, Mara's team devised a final operation to strike at the heart of the Karath command. Using every advantage, every tactic they had learned, and the courage of both humans and Illyrians, they launched a coordinated attack. Ships were hijacked, energy shields disabled, and the Karath leadership targeted. The battle was fierce, destructive, and chaotic, but victory was within reach. The Illyrians, witnessing these events, felt something they hadn't experienced in months: hope. They saw the humans risk everything for them, fighting against impossible odds, and it inspired courage. They began to fight alongside them with determination and unity, blending their gentle wisdom with human ferocity. It was a strange but powerful combination, a force the Karath had never imagined. When the final Karath command ship fell, the skies cleared. The surviving enemy fled, leaving behind weapons, technology, and a planet scarred but not defeated. The Illyrians emerged from their shelters, blinking in the sunlight, realizing that they had survived. Humans, battered and exhausted, looked around at the survivors with quiet satisfaction. They had done what few others could, turned despair into hope, fear into action, and hopelessness into victory. The Illyrians now understood something profound. The universe had sent them the wrong species, and it had been the best possible mistake. They had not expected warriors, not ones with fire in their hearts and recklessness in their minds, but these Deathworlders had saved them, not by following rules, not by playing fair, but by surviving and refusing to quit. They had shown that courage, determination, and unity could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. Mara stood on the ridge once more, looking at the ruined yet liberated planet below. She had lost comrades, faced impossible odds, and risked everything, but the mission was successful. The Illyrians were safe for now, and their world could begin to heal. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the universe doesn't send gentle saviors. Sometimes it sends fighters who would rather die than allow others to perish. And sometimes that's exactly what a civilization needs to survive. The battle had ended, but the story was far from over. The humans had shown the Illyrians how to fight, but more importantly, they had shown them how to hope. And in the quiet aftermath, as the fires cooled and the survivors began to rebuild, one truth remained. When Deathworlders answer a call for help, the consequences change everything. The war had revealed the unexpected. Bravery can come from chaos, courage from recklessness, and hope from the most dangerous of species. The Illyrians would never forget it. They had learned that survival was not just about avoiding death. It was about fighting for life no matter how impossible it seemed. And the Deathworlders. They had proven once again why no one in the galaxy should ever underestimate humans. The war on Illyria had finally ended, but the planet was far from healed. Cities were in ruins, forests burned, and the air was still thick with smoke from battles that had raged for months. The Illyrians walked among the remnants of their homes, faces marked with grief and exhaustion. Yet there was a spark in their eyes, a faint glow of hope that had not existed before. The humans had shown them something extraordinary, not just the power of fighting, but the strength of survival, courage, and unity. The Illyrians, once timid and gentle, were no longer helpless. They had learned that the universe could be cruel, but it could also be faced with determination. Captain Mara Collins and her team had accomplished the impossible. Against overwhelming odds, they had protected the Illyrians and turned the tide against the Karath Dominion. But the cost had been high. Many humans had fallen, and their sacrifices weighed heavily on those who remained. Mara stood on the ridge overlooking the plains below, her armor scorched and her face tired, yet her eyes were sharp. She watched as Illyrians began to rebuild, inspired by the fierce example set by her crew. "They will survive," she said quietly to Commander Rhea. "Not because I saved them, but because we showed them how to fight." The Illyrians had begun to rebuild their society with guidance from the humans. They repaired broken homes, restored water systems, and reopened schools. Children returned to play in the streets, laughter replacing the cries of despair. For the first time in months, the planet felt alive again. The humans taught them more than survival skills. They taught them resilience, strategy, and self-reliance. No longer did the Illyrians wait for help to arrive. They had learned to act, to defend themselves, and to take control of their destiny. High Chancellor Lyra gathered her people for a meeting in the ruins of the capital. She stood before a crowd of Illyrians, her face solemn but determined. "We have survived what we thought was impossible," she said. "Our world was nearly destroyed, and yet here we stand. We have learned the strength of courage and the power of unity. We have learned from the humans, the Deathworlders, that survival is not given. It is earned." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices echoing across the broken city. For the first time, they felt truly empowered. The humans began preparing to leave Illyria. Their mission had been completed, and Earth's government was calling them back. But the Illyrians did not want them to go. Children ran up to hug soldiers, elders thanked medics for saving their families, and artists painted murals of the humans on ruined walls. Lyra approached Mara, her eyes filled with emotion. "You came to save us," she said, "but you have done more than that. You have taught us what it means to fight, to survive, and to hope. We will never forget you." Mara nodded, her voice steady but soft. "We didn't do it for recognition," she said. "We did it because no one deserves to be left behind. You were meant to survive, and we made sure you could." Before departing, the Illyrians and humans worked together to create a monument, a lasting symbol of the bond forged through fire and blood. The monument was built in the capital, where the largest battles had taken place. It was simple yet powerful, a stone pillar engraved with both Illyrian and human symbols, surrounded by smaller stones representing the fallen. The words etched into the monument read, "To the children of the Death World, who answered when no one else would." It stood as a reminder that courage could come from the most unexpected places, and that even the most fragile species could endure when guided by determination. As the humans prepared their ships for departure, Mara took a moment to walk among the Illyrians. She observed the new leaders emerging, teaching others how to defend themselves and maintain order. Illyrian children played games inspired by human training exercises, laughing as they ran through obstacle courses and mock battles. The humans had not only saved lives, they had changed the very nature of Illyrian society. What had begun as a rescue mission had become a transformation of a civilization. The journey back to Earth was quiet, reflective. The human crew sat in the observation deck of the Valkyrie, looking at the stars and thinking about everything they had witnessed. "It's strange," said one of the engineers. "We went to help, but I feel like they helped us too." Mara nodded. "They did. They reminded us what we fight for. Not just survival, but hope, culture, and life itself. That's why we go into danger. To protect something worth keeping." Their words hung in the air, heavy with understanding. The universe was vast and dangerous, but moments like these made it worth the risk. Back on Illyria, the planet began a new chapter. Survivors rebuilt homes and schools, cultivated fields, and restored rivers. Art and music returned, mingled now with stories of courage, survival, and the humans who had helped them. Illyrians had learned to combine their natural gentleness with the ferocity of survival. They had become a society that could protect itself, a civilization that could endure even in the face of overwhelming odds. Their people were stronger, wiser, and braver than ever before. The Illyrians never forgot the humans. Every year, they held a day of remembrance for the Deathworlders, honoring their courage and sacrifice. They told stories of Captain Mara Collins, Commander Rhea, and the engineers, medics, and soldiers who had risked everything to save them. Songs were written, murals painted, and children taught about the bravery that had changed their world forever. The humans had come uninvited, unexpected, and fierce, and the Illyrians understood that without them, their civilization might have perished. Years later, explorers from other planets would come to Illyria and see the monument. They would hear the stories, learn of the humans' courage, and realize that the universe sometimes sends help in the strangest forms. The Illyrians, once considered fragile and helpless, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. And the humans, the Deathworlders, had left an indelible mark on a distant planet, not through domination or conquest, but through courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to abandon those in need. For the humans, the mission became legendary on Earth. Stories of the rescue of Illyria spread quietly among the space exploration communities. It was not a mission for glory, it was a mission of duty and compassion. Yet its impact was enormous. Humans had proven to the galaxy that they were not just survivors, but warriors for justice, capable of changing the fate of entire civilizations. They had answered a call meant for saviors and, in doing so, became legends in a galaxy that had underestimated them. Mara often thought about the Illyrians and the journey they had shared. The planet had taught her team that strength was not measured solely by weapons or technology, but by courage, unity, and the willingness to face impossible odds for the sake of others. She had gone to help a fragile species, but she returned knowing that humans too had grown. They had learned the value of hope and the power of selflessness in ways that textbooks could never teach. The Illyrians, meanwhile, had changed forever. They were no longer passive, waiting for rescue or guidance. They had learned to fight, to defend themselves, and to take initiative. They had learned that courage could be taught, but that inspiration had to come from the heart. Humanity had provided that spark, and the Illyrians carried it forward. Their civilization, once fragile and isolated, was now prepared to face whatever challenges the universe might throw at them. And so, the story of the Deathworlders' intervention came to an end. Not with a grand celebration, but with quiet determination, rebuilding, and remembrance. The Illyrians thrived because someone had dared to risk everything for them. The humans returned to their own world, carrying the memory of courage, sacrifice, and the knowledge that even the smallest act of bravery could change the fate of an entire species. The galaxy would remember that day not for the destruction of the Karath, but for the courage of a species that refused to leave anyone behind. The universe had sent the wrong species to answer the call, and it had been the best possible mistake. The Illyrians survived, grew stronger, and learned to fight for themselves. The humans, the Deathworlders, had left an enduring legacy, one of courage, resilience, and hope that would echo across the stars for generations to come. And the monument in the capital stood as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous beings in the galaxy are also the most capable of saving lives. The story ended with quiet satisfaction, a new beginning for Illyria, and a lasting testament to the strength of courage, unity, and the unexpected power of those who answer the call when all seems lost.